What if I told you that a single human, armed with nothing but stone-tipped spears, could bring down a creature weighing 6 tons? The story of solo mammoth hunting is far stranger than you've been told. Deep in the permafrost of Siberia, archaeologists discovered something that rewrites everything we thought we knew about ancient hunting. In 2019, researchers found a mammoth skeleton with a peculiar pattern of injuries. The wounds weren't from a group attack, but from a single hunter who stalked this giant for 3 days straight. This wasn't desperation. It was strategy. Ancient humans didn't just survive the Ice Age. They mastered it through techniques so sophisticated that modern hunters are only now beginning to understand them. The conventional wisdom says mammoth hunting required large groups, coordinated attacks, and elaborate traps. But evidence from sites across Europe and Asia tells a different story. Solo hunters existed, and they were far more common than we ever imagined. These weren't reckless individuals. They were specialists who understood mammoth behavior better than the creatures understood themselves. Let's start with something that will blow your mind. Ancient humans could predict exactly when a mammoth would be vulnerable. They studied seasonal patterns, tracked individual animals for weeks, and waited for the perfect moment. That moment wasn't when the mammoth was healthy and strong. It was during the autumn rut when male mammoths became aggressive, territorial, and dangerously distracted. During mating season, bull mammoths would fight each other for dominance. These battles left them exhausted, injured, and separated from their herds. A skilled hunter would identify a wounded bull, one that had lost a fight and was now alone. This is when the real hunt began, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with patience that would make a modern sniper look impatient. The hunter would follow at a distance, never letting the mammoth see or smell him. Ancient humans understood wind patterns with a precision that seems almost supernatural. They could read the landscape, predict how air currents would flow through valleys and over ridges, and position themselves to remain completely undetectable. This could go on for days, with the hunter sleeping in short intervals, always keeping the mammoth in sight. Here's where it gets fascinating. The hunter wasn't waiting to attack. He was waiting for the mammoth to weaken itself. A wounded, stressed mammoth would eventually need to drink. Water sources during the Ice Age were predictable, and a smart hunter knew every stream, pond, and melting ice patch in his territory. He would get there first and prepare the killing ground. The preparation was meticulous. The hunter would identify the exact spot where the mammoth would likely stand to drink. Then he would dig small pits, just deep enough to destabilize the creature's footing. These weren't traps in the traditional sense, they were tactical disadvantages. A 6-ton mammoth with 1 foot in a shallow pit loses its ability to charge or turn quickly. Next came the spear caches. The hunter would hide multiple spears near the water source, stuck into the ground at angles, ready to grab. This wasn't about carrying weapons. It was about having them exactly where they were needed. Each spear was positioned for a specific type of throw, a specific angle of attack. This level of preparation shows a mind that thought in 3 dimensions, calculating trajectories and probabilities. But here's the detail that changes everything. Ancient hunters didn't aim for the heart or the head. Those targets were protected by thick hide, dense muscle, and, in the case of the skull, solid bone. Instead, they targeted the femoral artery in the back leg. One precise strike to this location, and the mammoth would bleed out in minutes. The hunter just had to avoid being killed in those minutes. The actual attack was terrifyingly simple. As the mammoth lowered its head to drink, the hunter would emerge from downwind, moving with absolute silence. The first spear would strike the back leg, severing the artery. The mammoth would rear up in pain and confusion, and this is when the shallow pits became crucial. The creature's weight would shift, one foot would sink, and its balance would fail. A falling mammoth is a dying mammoth. The impact of 6 tons hitting the ground would cause internal injuries, broken ribs, and most importantly, complete disorientation. The hunter would then retrieve his cached spears and strike repeatedly at the same wound, widening it, ensuring the blood loss was catastrophic. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution based on perfect knowledge and timing. Now, you might be wondering how we know all this. The evidence comes from multiple sources, and it's more detailed than you'd expect. First, there are the cut marks on mammoth bones. Modern forensic analysis can determine the angle, force, and sequence of strikes. Some mammoth remains show a pattern consistent with a single attacker working methodically over a short period. Second, we have the spear points themselves. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found caches of spear points buried near ancient water sources. These weren't lost, they were stored. The positioning is too deliberate, too strategic. Someone was preparing killing grounds and maintaining them over time. This suggests not just individual hunts, but a systematic approach to solo mammoth hunting. Third, and this is perhaps the most compelling evidence, we have the footprints. In 2021, researchers in New Mexico discovered a trackway that tells an incredible story. A single set of human footprints follows a mammoth track for over 2 miles. The human prints show a walking pace, steady and patient. The mammoth prints show increasing signs of stress, deeper impressions, irregular spacing. At the end of this trackway, there's a depression in the ancient soil, a place where something large fell and didn't get up. Scattered around this depression are the remains of stone tools and mammoth bones with cut marks. 1 human, 1 mammoth, 1 successful hunt. The evidence is undeniable, and it's not unique. Similar trackways have been found in Alaska, Siberia, and Spain. But why would anyone hunt alone? The answer isn't what you'd expect. It wasn't about bravery or proving oneself. It was about efficiency and survival mathematics. When a group kills a mammoth, the meat has to be divided among many people. A single mammoth provides about 2,000 pounds of usable meat. Split among 20 hunters, that's only 100 pounds each. But a solo hunter who kills a mammoth faces a different problem. He can't possibly eat or preserve all that meat alone. This is where the social dynamics of Ice Age communities become crucial. A successful solo hunter would return to his group with news of the kill. The entire community would then travel to the carcass for a massive feast and preservation effort. Here's the genius of this system. The solo hunter gained enormous prestige and social status. He proved his skill, his knowledge, and his value to the community. In return, he would receive the best portions of meat, priority in mate selection, and a voice in group decisions. The risk of solo hunting was balanced by social rewards that made it worthwhile. This brings us to a controversial theory that's gaining support among archaeologists. Some researchers now believe that solo mammoth hunting was actually a rite of passage for young men in certain Ice Age cultures. The evidence for this comes from the age analysis of human remains found near mammoth kill sites. Several sites show the remains of young males between 18 and 25 years old, buried with mammoth ivory and specialized hunting tools. These aren't ordinary burials. They're elaborate ceremonies that suggest these individuals held special status. The theory is that successfully hunting a mammoth alone was how a young man proved he was ready for full adult responsibilities. If this theory is correct, it means solo mammoth hunting wasn't rare or desperate. It was institutionalized. Young hunters would be trained from childhood in the specific skills needed. They would learn to read mammoth behavior, understand seasonal patterns, and master the precise throwing techniques required. By the time they attempted their first solo hunt, they were as prepared as any modern special forces operative. The training would have been intense and dangerous. Young hunters would practice on smaller animals first, mastering the art of the patient stalk. They would learn to go days without sleep, to move silently across any terrain, and to calculate the exact moment when prey was most vulnerable. Failure meant death, but success meant everything. Let's talk about the weapons themselves, because they were far more sophisticated than simple spears. Recent analysis of Ice Age spear points reveals something remarkable. These weren't just sharpened stones tied to sticks. They were engineered projectiles designed with an understanding of physics that wouldn't be formally described until thousands of years later. The spear points were asymmetrical, deliberately shaped to create spin during flight. This spin stabilized the spear and increased penetration power. The hafting, the way the point was attached to the shaft, was designed to break on impact in a specific way. The point would remain embedded in the wound while the shaft fell away, preventing the animal from dislodging it. Even more impressive, some spear points show evidence of being heated and rapidly cooled, a process that increases the hardness of the stone. This is essentially a form of heat treatment, a metallurgical technique that wasn't supposed to exist in the Stone Age. Ancient hunters were manipulating material properties at a molecular level without understanding the science, but achieving the results through careful observation and experimentation. The spears themselves were weighted and balanced with incredible precision. By analyzing the wear patterns on ancient spear throwers, researchers have determined that Ice Age hunters could throw a spear with enough force to penetrate 6 inches of hide and muscle. That's comparable to a modern crossbow bolt. The human arm, properly trained and equipped, was a lethal weapon system. But the most fascinating aspect of solo mammoth hunting isn't the weapons or the tactics. It's the psychological warfare. Ancient hunters understood that mammoths were intelligent, emotional creatures with complex social bonds. They used this knowledge to their advantage in ways that seem almost cruel by modern standards. A hunter stalking a wounded bull mammoth would sometimes make himself briefly visible, just for a moment. The mammoth would see a human, recognize the threat, and become agitated. This agitation would increase the animal's heart rate, causing it to bleed faster from its wounds. The hunter was literally scaring the mammoth to death, using fear as a weapon as effective as any spear. There's evidence that some hunters would use fire in a similar way. They would create small smoke fires upwind of the mammoth, not enough to cause panic, but enough to create constant stress. A stressed mammoth breathes harder, moves more, and exhausts itself faster. The hunter was fighting a war of attrition, and time was his greatest ally. This level of psychological manipulation required deep knowledge of mammoth behavior. Hunters would have spent years observing these animals, learning their body language, understanding their vocalizations, and recognizing the signs of stress, injury, or illness. They were amateur zoologists conducting field research that would have impressed modern scientists. Now let's address something that might be bothering you. How did a solo hunter protect himself from other predators while processing a mammoth carcass? This is a crucial question because a dead mammoth would attract every carnivore in the region. Cave lions, dire wolves, and short-faced bears would all be drawn to the scent of blood. The answer lies in fire and positioning. A successful hunter would immediately build multiple fires around the carcass, creating a perimeter of flame and smoke. Predators are naturally wary of fire, and the smoke would help mask the scent of blood, at least temporarily. The hunter would then work frantically to extract the most valuable parts, the organs, the fat, and the tongue. These parts were small enough to carry, but calorie-dense enough to make the risk worthwhile. The hunter wasn't trying to process the entire mammoth alone. That would be impossible. He was taking what he could carry, and then leaving to bring back help. The fires would keep predators at bay for a few hours, long enough for the hunter to put distance between himself and the kill site. But here's a detail that shows just how clever these hunters were. Before leaving, they would sometimes deliberately damage the mammoth's tusks. This seems counterintuitive since ivory was valuable, but it served a purpose. Damaged tusks were less attractive to other humans who might stumble upon the carcass. It was a way of marking the kill as claimed, a primitive property right enforced by social convention. The journey back to the community was its own challenge. The hunter would be exhausted, carrying heavy loads of meat and fat, and moving through dangerous territory. This is where the social bonds of Ice Age communities become evident. Successful hunters would often have a partner, not for the hunt itself, but for the return journey. This partner would wait at a predetermined location, ready to help carry the prize and watch for danger. This partnership system reveals something important about Ice Age society. These weren't primitive savages living in constant competition. They were sophisticated people with complex social structures, mutual aid agreements, and long-term cooperative relationships. Solo mammoth hunting was possible because it existed within a framework of community support. Let's talk about failure, because not every hunt succeeded. The archaeological record shows numerous examples of hunters who died attempting to kill mammoths alone. These deaths weren't random. They follow patterns that tell us about the risks involved. Most fatal accidents occurred during the final attack, when the hunter was closest to the mammoth and most vulnerable. A mammoth's trunk was a devastating weapon, capable of breaking bones with a single strike. The tusks could gore a human with ease, and the feet could crush a person instantly. Even a dying mammoth was incredibly dangerous, perhaps more so because it had nothing to lose. Hunters who got too confident or too close paid with their lives. But here's what's remarkable. Communities that practiced solo mammoth hunting developed elaborate funeral rites for hunters who died in the attempt. These weren't treated as failures. They were honored as heroes who died in service to their people. The burials include mammoth ivory, suggesting that even an unsuccessful hunt brought prestige to the hunter's family. This cultural attitude toward risk and failure is fascinating. It suggests that Ice Age people understood probability and acceptable losses. They knew that some hunters would die, but the overall benefit to the community made the practice worthwhile. This is sophisticated risk management, the kind of thinking we associate with modern institutions, not Stone Age tribes. Now, let's explore a question that has puzzled researchers for decades. How did ancient humans first discover that solo mammoth hunting was even possible? The conventional theory is that it happened by accident, a lone hunter stumbling upon a wounded mammoth and seizing the opportunity. But recent evidence suggests something more deliberate. In southern France, archaeologists discovered a cave with remarkable paintings. These aren't the famous animal portraits you've seen in textbooks. These are instructional diagrams showing the anatomy of a mammoth with specific points marked in red ochre. The marked points correspond exactly to the locations where strikes would be most effective: the femoral artery, the soft tissue behind the front leg, the vulnerable spot at the base of the skull. These diagrams are at least 30,000 years old, possibly older. They represent accumulated knowledge, passed down through generations and refined over time. This wasn't trial and error by individuals. It was a systematic body of knowledge, a hunting science that was taught and preserved. Solo mammoth hunting was a technology, as important to Ice Age people as smartphones are to us. The teaching methods would have been sophisticated. Young hunters would learn through observation, practice, and storytelling. Successful hunts would be recounted in detail around fires, with every decision and action analyzed. Failures would be discussed just as thoroughly, turning tragedy into lessons that could save future lives. This oral tradition was their textbook, and it was remarkably effective. But there's another aspect to this knowledge transmission that's even more intriguing. Some researchers believe that Ice Age people used psychoactive plants to enhance their hunting abilities. Evidence from several sites shows the presence of plant compounds that affect perception, focus, and pain tolerance. These weren't recreational drugs, they were performance enhancers. Imagine a hunter who has been stalking a mammoth for 3 days. He's exhausted, cold, and operating on minimal sleep. A carefully prepared plant mixture could sharpen his senses, reduce his perception of fatigue, and increase his reaction time. This isn't speculation. Modern analysis of ancient human remains has found traces of these compounds in bone tissue. The use of these substances would have been ritualized and controlled. Not every hunter would have access, and the knowledge of preparation would be closely guarded. This adds another layer to the solo mammoth hunting tradition. It wasn't just physical skill and knowledge. It was also about accessing altered states of consciousness that enhanced human capabilities beyond normal limits. Let's shift to a different aspect of this story: the environmental knowledge required for successful solo hunting. Ancient hunters didn't just understand mammoths, they understood entire ecosystems. They knew which plants mammoths preferred, which water sources they visited, and how weather patterns affected their behavior. This ecological knowledge was vast and detailed. For example, hunters knew that mammoths would seek out specific mineral deposits to supplement their diet. These salt licks were predictable gathering points, and a smart hunter would monitor them regularly. By observing which mammoths visited and when, a hunter could identify individuals, track their health, and predict their movements. This was data collection and analysis, performed without writing or computers, but no less sophisticated. Weather prediction was another crucial skill. A hunter needed to know when storms were coming, not just for his own safety, but because weather affected mammoth behavior. Before a major storm, mammoths would seek shelter in valleys or forests. A hunter who could predict this movement could position himself along the route, turning natural behavior into a tactical advantage. The night sky was also a tool. Ancient hunters used stars for navigation, but also for timekeeping. They knew that certain constellations appeared at specific times of year, and these times corresponded to changes in mammoth behavior. The stars were their calendar, helping them predict mating seasons, migration patterns, and optimal hunting windows. Astronomy and hunting were inseparable skills. Here's something that will surprise you. Solo mammoth hunters were also expert botanists. They needed to know which plants could be used for medicine, which could poison their spear points, and which could be used to preserve meat. The archaeological record shows that hunters carried small pouches containing various plant materials, each with a specific purpose. This was their toolkit, as important as their weapons. Some plants could be used to create a paste that masked human scent. Others could be burned to create smoke that would calm or confuse animals. Still others had medicinal properties that could treat wounds, reduce inflammation, or fight infection. A hunter who was injured during a solo hunt had to be his own doctor, and plant knowledge was his pharmacy. The preservation of meat was particularly important. A solo hunter who killed a mammoth needed to keep his portion fresh until he could return to his community. Ancient people discovered that certain plants had antimicrobial properties. They would wrap meat in leaves or pack it with specific herbs, creating a primitive but effective preservation system. This knowledge saved lives and made solo hunting viable. Now let's talk about something controversial. Some researchers believe that ancient humans didn't just hunt mammoths, they managed them. This theory suggests that certain groups practiced a form of proto-ranching, where they would protect mammoth herds from other predators, guide them to good grazing areas, and selectively hunt only specific individuals. The evidence for this is circumstantial but intriguing. At several sites, researchers have found patterns suggesting that humans and mammoths coexisted in the same areas for thousands of years. The mammoth populations in these areas show signs of selective pressure. They were slightly smaller, less aggressive, and more tolerant of human presence. This could be natural selection driven by human hunting practices. If this theory is correct, solo mammoth hunting takes on a different meaning. It wasn't just hunting, it was herd management. A hunter who killed an aggressive bull was removing a genetic line that was dangerous to humans. Over generations, this would create mammoth populations that were easier to live alongside, even to exploit. This would be animal husbandry in its earliest form, thousands of years before the domestication of sheep or cattle. This managed relationship would explain some puzzling aspect of the archaeological record. Why do some mammoth populations seem to have tolerated human presence? Why are there sites where humans and mammoths lived in close proximity for extended periods? The answer might be that these weren't wild animals being hunted. They were semi-managed populations in a complex ecological relationship with humans. But let's return to the individual hunter and his experience. What was it like psychologically to hunt a mammoth alone? Modern hunters who have studied these ancient techniques report that the experience is transformative. The level of focus required, the constant awareness, the patience, all of it creates a mental state that's difficult to describe. Some describe it as a form of meditation, where the hunter becomes so attuned to his environment that he almost merges with it. Others talk about a heightened sense of time, where hours feel like minutes and every detail becomes crystal clear. This isn't mysticism, it's the result of extreme concentration and the neurological changes that occur during high-stakes situations. Ancient hunters would have experienced this regularly. For them, this altered state wasn't unusual. It was a normal part of their work. This might explain some of the spiritual and religious practices of Ice Age people. The cave paintings, the ritual burials, the elaborate ceremonies. All of these might be attempts to capture and honor the psychological experiences of hunting. There's also the question of fear. How did ancient hunters manage the terror of facing a 6-ton animal alone? Modern psychology tells us that fear can be controlled through training, preparation, and ritual. Ancient hunters would have used all of these techniques. The elaborate preparations before a hunt weren't just practical, they were psychological armor, building confidence through action. The rituals before a hunt would have served multiple purposes. They created a mental transition from normal life to hunting mode. They reinforced the hunter's identity and purpose. And they provided a sense of control in a situation that was inherently dangerous and unpredictable. These weren't superstitions. They were psychological tools that improved performance and survival rates. After a successful hunt, there would be more rituals. These ones focused on processing the experience and reintegrating into normal social life. A hunter who had just killed a mammoth alone had proven himself capable of extraordinary things. Without proper rituals to mark this transition, he might struggle to return to everyday activities. The ceremonies weren't just celebrations, they were psychological decompression. Let's consider the physical toll of solo mammoth hunting. Modern athletes who train for extreme endurance events experience significant physiological changes. Ancient hunters who regularly engaged in multi-day stalks would have developed similar adaptations. Their cardiovascular systems would be incredibly efficient, their muscles adapted for sustained low-intensity activity, and their metabolisms optimized for irregular food intake. But there would also be costs. The stress of repeated dangerous hunts would take a toll. Modern studies of people in high-risk professions show increased rates of certain health problems. Ancient hunters likely experienced similar issues. The skeletal remains of individuals identified as hunters show patterns of arthritis, healed fractures, and other injuries consistent with a physically demanding and dangerous lifestyle. Yet these people lived this way for thousands of years. The practice of solo mammoth hunting persisted across multiple cultures and continents. This suggests that despite the risks and costs, the benefits were substantial enough to make it worthwhile. The prestige, the food security, the social status, all of these combined to create a powerful incentive structure. Now let's address a question you might be asking. If solo mammoth hunting was so effective, why did it disappear? The answer is complex and involves multiple factors. The most obvious is that mammoths went extinct. As the Ice Age ended and climates changed, mammoth populations declined. The last mammoths died out around 4,000 years ago, and with them went the knowledge and practices of mammoth hunting. But there's more to it than that. As human societies became more complex and sedentary, the social structures that supported solo hunting changed. Agriculture and animal domestication provided more reliable food sources. The prestige associated with hunting declined as other forms of status emerged. The specialists who once hunted mammoths alone found new roles in their communities. There's also evidence that the knowledge was deliberately suppressed in some cultures. As religious and political hierarchies developed, the independent, high-status position of solo hunters became problematic. Leaders wanted to control food distribution and social prestige. Solo hunters who could provide for themselves and gain status through individual action didn't fit into these new power structures. Some researchers believe that the transition from hunting to agriculture wasn't entirely voluntary. It was also a political process, where certain groups consolidated power by controlling food production. Solo hunters represented an alternative model, one where individual skill and knowledge could provide independence from group hierarchies. This made them a threat to emerging elites. The last known practitioners of solo mammoth hunting were probably in Siberia, where small mammoth populations survived longer than elsewhere. There are oral traditions among some indigenous Siberian groups that mention ancestors who hunted great beasts alone. These stories are dismissed by some as mythology, but they might contain kernels of historical truth, memories of real practices passed down through generations. What can we learn from the story of solo mammoth hunting? First, it challenges our assumptions about ancient humans. These weren't primitive people struggling to survive. They were sophisticated specialists with deep knowledge, complex skills, and remarkable courage. They developed techniques that worked, refined them over generations, and passed them down through cultural transmission. Second, it shows us that human capability is far greater than we often assume. A single person, properly trained and prepared, could accomplish things that seem impossible. This wasn't superhuman ability. It was the result of knowledge, practice, and determination. The same principles apply today in different contexts. Third, it reminds us that our ancestors lived in a world we can barely imagine. They faced challenges that would terrify most modern people, and they not only survived, but thrived. The knowledge they developed, the techniques they mastered, and the courage they displayed deserve our respect and study.
The story of solo mammoth hunting is ultimately a story about human potential. It's about what becomes possible when knowledge, skill, and courage combine. It's about individuals who pushed the boundaries of what humans could do, not for glory or fame, but for survival and the good of their communities. Their legacy isn't in monuments or written records, it's in the fact that we exist at all, descendants of people who could hunt mammoths alone.